Good morning, everybody. It's 10 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. First item on the agenda is the meeting summary from October the 5th. Are there any changes, corrections, or I will take a motion to approve?
So moved.
Tyrone, Jordan. All in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. Aye. Thanks. The first item is the jobs. You all remember at the last meeting we had a conversation about some of the compliance efforts, and so Ashley is back to kind of talk through some of the items that we talked about at that meeting. So Ashley Simpson.
Sure, thank you, Chair, and good morning, board members. As Kevin said, we're going to pick up today where we left off last time, having more of a general discussion about the Jobs Fund as well as an update on some of the compliance that we've seen since our last meeting. And are we able to get those slides up? You guys should have copies of the slides today, as well as some information on the compliance of two companies that we're going to go into more specifics about. Sure. Just 1 second and we'll be right back at it.
So while Ashley is loading the presentation, Michael will be listening in, obviously, on this presentation, but you may want to go ahead and, for the
Yes.
purposes of the record.
So I need to recuse myself, but I'm going to stay here as my company's being talked about. So I will be quiet and be a listening participant.
Sure. We'll switch the presentation kind of in the middle, but we'll go ahead and start with this for now. We're going to start with our financial overview, and this should look familiar to you all. Since the last time that we spoke, we've gained about $20,000 in revenues. So at this point, we've got $1,223,000 that would be available for award if we receive any applications that are of interest or anything like that. And then, as far as the compliance reports that we've seen since our last meeting, we've received 3 additional reports. 2 of those are listed at the top and were found to be compliant. That means that they are meeting or exceeding the goals that are outlined for them in their agreement with us. And those include Summit Bioscience. We saw them around this time last year, so they're reporting for FY22. They were found to be compliant, and they're on a non-traditional loan with a forgivable principal. So they'll receive an additional 10% of principal forgiveness moving forward. The other was Space Tango, who we found to meet or exceed their agreement of $34.07 an hour is the average wage required, and then 7 jobs created. So they were found to be compliant on all fronts on the amount of jobs, their payment status, and maintaining their job site. At the bottom, we have one compliance report that we received that we found to be non-compliant, and that's for Fusion Corp. And we'll go into further discussion about this later, but they were found to be non-compliant in the number of jobs that were required. Their agreement requires 8 positions to be created, and they currently have 1. So they're found to be non-compliant on the job status. You'll see up there that it says the payment status is non-compliant. I do want to note that they have been making interest-only payments to us. So that's in an effort to show that they want to make payments, that they want to be compliant as they are increasing their revenues. So while it says non-compliant, there have been payments received. And then on the job site status, it says non-compliant. That will be changing to compliant. You'll see in your packet with the additional information from the company that they've changed their job site. So while it doesn't match what was presented in the agreement, they do have a job site that is functioning, that is a work site, and that meets the requirements outlined in the agreement. Kind of as a reminder of last time and what we talked about, this was the list from last time, what you saw in those charts. We had 6 Jobs Fund recipients that we reported to be in compliance up there and 3 that were not. So including Fusion Core today, we would have 4 that we need to discuss between now and next year. So those were Legit Apps, WareWare, and Hydra, and now we've added Fusion Core to that list. Legit Apps and Fusion Core had a lot of similarities in their compliance review and kind of how COVID has affected them and how they have pared down their staffing. So we're going to take them together as a group today and look at Legit Apps and Fusion Core more closely. Does anybody have any questions at this point before we look into their compliance plans? If not, we'll go forward. And this is where we kind of lose our slides. So we got them? Great. Here we go. So we have compliance plan reviews today for Legit Apps and Fusion Core. When we spoke at our last meeting, you all had requested some additional information. We talked about getting written statements from the companies to kind of talk through how COVID affected them and for them to present some type of plan to get back in compliance, what they would need. So our first is Legit Apps. They are compliant on their payments. They've continued to make their full payments during the time after the loan forgiveness expired for the COVID that was approved. They are non-compliant on the mean wage and jobs created. They currently only have one position of the 10 that are required in their agreement, and it does not pay at the required average wage. If you'll look in your materials, you'll see that that position pays $19.23 an hour as opposed to the $29.50 an hour that we required in the agreement. So 1 of 10. They have a principal outstanding of $70,000, and so when all those factors come together to complete the formula that's in the agreement, the penalty that would be assessed for them would be $8,065. Kind of last time we had touched on what could the board do? What could we do in these situations of noncompliance? We can apply a penalty, we can call back the loan, or we can look at, in a special situation, we could look at each of the recipients and make decisions on if we wanted to restructure or offer some type of special agreement to the company. This company, Legit Apps, and Mr. Brock Klein did submit a memo to the board, and he outlines what some of the impacts of COVID were to his business, and he outlines his plan for how he believes that he could become compliant. He has, if you look through there, he talks about how he had just changed his model going into COVID and how his business had planned his revenue model and how the impacts of COVID just kind of washed that. So he has some new ways that he's going about that with his company and that they're pursuing revenue agreements. They're also in the process of hiring some positions right now, some that would apply towards this loan and some that don't. Some, for instance, they had cut their administrative staff, and they'll be bringing some of those back. They don't apply towards our numbers for our agreement, but I think it shows that they are beginning to staff up and to move towards their former model. They did make some requests to the board, which include to continue the current repayment schedule that they're on. They'd like to continue to make the payments that they're making, but have requested the waiver of the penalty. So instead of assessing that additional monthly and increasing their payment, they'd like to remain on the schedule that they're on. They believe that it will take them 18 months to fully meet that goal of 10 jobs created, and they've requested a review at the 18-month point with the board after making their quarterly payments for that period of time. To show that they can reach compliance and to be back on track. So that is what they would be requesting from the board at this time. Are there any questions on Legit Apps?
So, yeah, and let's talk about Legit Apps before we go to the next one. So it is going to be our recommendation to you all that we are fine with waiving the 21 penalty. I mean, I think we all know what this year has been like for everybody, but not the 2022. This is not the time, not to say we wouldn't at some point in time, but we're not even in 2022 yet. The other so we're going to make the recommendation with you all's approval that we do waive the 21 penalty, but not 22, and that the request be knocked down to 6 months instead of 18. 18 months is a long time, and if they come back in 6 months, we're still in the shape we are now, then we can talk about it, but 6 months is a more appropriate time for review. So with those additions to what Ashley said, I'll throw it open. Tyrone?
Right, thank you. Now, I'm really concerned about the 18 months. Again, I don't mind the penalties and the waiving of the penalties and that kind of thing. But I think that 6 months, we could see if they had some progress. It seems like if we gave them 18 months, they would just get a chance to, there's no urgency. And, there's no fire set under them. So I think that, we ought to put a fire on them by giving them 6 months and then going back and reassessing then.
My question was, are they aware of that option? Have you communicated that with them yet?
So this is their request.
No, I meant the 6-month option.
Oh,
Is it-
no,
Gotcha.
that would be what the board,
Okay.
we would go back to them with what the board has approved. as
Okay,
far
thanks.
as-
I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Kevin, if we're not waiving the penalty for 2022, would they be required to then start paying that in January? Or would you wait and see?
It would be this time next year. They could come back at the end of 2020. We're not precluding them for asking for anything. What we're saying is, we'll agree to 2021. We'll give you 6 months, and then we'll address the others as the benchmarks hit.
That's what
So we probably need a motion to that effect, so that we have it in the record.
Move to accept the city's recommendation.
Ann Tyler,
I'll second.
Tyrone, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you all. And Michael, did we already take care of your recuse?
Yeah.
Okay. So Ashley?
Moving on, we'll be discussing Fusion Core. Fusion Core has been making those interest-only payments, as we discussed in the slide earlier. They're non-compliant on the mean wage and on the jobs created. And actually, that's inaccurate. They are compliant on the mean wage for that one job that's created, but overall, if you add them all together, it wouldn't be. So I apologize for that. That's confusing. They have one position of the 8 that's required by their agreement, and the principal outstanding is a little over $200,000 on this loan. So there again, all those factors together, when you follow the formula within the agreement, their penalty would be a little over $20,000 or $1,700 a month when assessed. With those options put towards the board that we discussed with the last. They also have submitted a packet and a letter to the board which outlines the factors that have affected them in COVID. Some of their businesses and their projects are tourism-based, so that would have been a great factor for them. In order to align their books or more greatly align their books, they moved to using contract labor as opposed to employees, so that's one thing that's affected the compliance of the agreement. So while there may be employees working for the company, they're contractors, and we would not count those towards the agreement, even if they were Lexington-based. They are in the hiring process or negotiations with 2 employees, so they are looking to staff up, and they do have some projects that are moving forward and some additional revenue sources with those new contracts that are pending. They expect to meet their employment goals by mid-2022 per their statement, and their request to the board was to continue with their interest-only payments, which would include a waiver of the penalty. We wouldn't be adding on that $1,700 a month. And then to submit quarterly reviews of financials and employment, and till which time they would be in compliance, which would be assumed to be that mid-2022.
So,
Questions about that?
so in the sake of consistency, what our recommendation would be is that we accept the interest-only payments, but we do it for a period of 6 months, and then come back and look at it at that point as an update on where the company is. Questions?
Kevin, my only question is, I think we discussed this company before, and there were some recommendations. I can't remember what they all were, but maybe it was an additional guarantee. Did those things happen?
I'm looking at Evan because I don't remember legally what we ended up.
If I remember correctly, those in negotiations with the company, we were informed that guarantees might not continue, might not sign on to new guarantees for the switching the companies to the other of Mr. Bayer's companies. So that didn't end up happening because the guarantees wouldn't continue.
But the originals,
Yes, but the originals are still good. So the contracts as it is now is good. It's just, I think there was turnover from those individuals with the guarantees. So it would be more difficult now to get them to guarantee, to continue to sign on to a new guarantee for the new company. And so it was determined that the risk would be too high to switch over without having the guarantees signed as well.
more question, I mean,
So what I think I heard is that there are some there's some change in the equity, some change in the ownership of the companies, and some of the prior guarantors that had agreed to guarantee when we last took this up are no longer with the company. Is that what I heard, basically? Okay. But the long and the short of it is, from when we considered this the last time, the recommendation of the board, or the action we took, was not ultimately able to be consummated. Is that correct? Yeah. So we don't have the additional security that, that we thought we did, ultimately.
actually, I think and Evan, all the original partner guarantees are still in place.
Yes, the original guarantees for this contract are still good. I think that the recommendation from the board was to, if I remember correctly, and this was a little while ago, but switch it to all the job and wage requirements to another of Mr. Bayer's companies. But in so doing, it was our recommendation to also get the new guarantees for that company to continue, just so that way we had something in writing saying that those guarantors were still guaranteeing the loan as with the assignment to Mr. Bayer's new company. So because felt like it would be difficult to get those new guarantors to accept the assignment, which would essentially be what this would be assigning the contract to another of Mr. Bayer's companies, that it didn't end up happening. So the original guarantees are still good on the contract, so that's not an issue. The issue was getting something in writing from the guarantors, agreeing to the assignment to the different company.
Anybody, Michael has recused himself from the vote, but is everybody comfortable if he, go right ahead.
So I guess it was about 6 to 8 months ago when the equity changed, the ownership changed in this specific company. We were talking about the idea of changing the guarantee to one of my other companies, and in doing so, we would have to have the people that signed the guarantee re-sign. And in doing so, the fact that the equity changed, we decided from a liability standpoint to not do that so we could keep the actual guarantees in place that are actively in place. So de facto not changing anything of the actual original agreement and continuing to move forward as the company is recovering from the pandemic, was in a nutshell.
For what it's worth, I feel like from the get-go, Michael has done nothing but keep us abreast of information that honestly I think was ahead of time, that I don't know what he's required to tell us or not to tell us, but I think from the conversation that you're referring to now, I feel like Fusion Core has shown nothing but a desire to be upfront and honest about the plan, how things are going, even a potential for something to change. So I think that conversation to now has made me feel nothing but confident that we'll be updated and secure in the situation.
Thank you, I appreciate that. and it was a little preemptive in the conversation, just trying to forecast what was going on. But over the last 6 months, seeing the turnaround that we have in potential opportunity and income and signed contracts, it actually kind of reinforced the decision of not moving forward in that direction. So, yeah, I've just always tried to be out in front of what's going on and put the potential out there of what could happen. Maybe we should plan for that in advance, and then not making that decision and continuing to move forward as we have is actually proven to be the right move at this point in time.
Any more questions? So if the board is comfortable with interest only and for 6 months with a review at that point in time, we will just need a motion. Liz, I heard Caroline, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. Ashley, anything else?
That will be all for me. Thank you.
And the final item on the agenda is Evan's going to come back up. We've made some changes to the industrial revenue bond guidelines. They're more updates than they are changes is probably the best way to phrase it. So, Evan.
I believe there should be a copy of the policies and guidelines as amended in the packet. Okay, yep, there it is. So for the first thing, would happen. One of as Kevin said, this is more of updates more than substantive changes. One of the first ones, and I think some of these might be based on experience, especially in the last year, now that we've started to get more IRBs than we've had in the past, that's kind of precipitated this. One is to add something that basically says that absent special and compelling circumstances, LFUCG will not issue an IRB bond exceeding 30 years. In order to keep these IRBs on a reasonable amount of time. I believe you can go up to, and Kevin know this more, but I think it's 40 years. So this would cut it at 30. The next update is in that next paragraph, updating the number of Economic Development Investment Board members to the current 13, with the 11 appointed by the mayor from the membership of the Chamber of Commerce, Industrial Authority, Housing Industry, Financial Investment Banking Industry, and Private Equity Venture Capital Industry. So that's just another change. That's just based because the board's numbers have changed since the last time the policies and guidelines have been updated. Another change is in that last paragraph on that page. Just making it clear that IRBs and housing bonds do not constitute an indebtedness of the urban county government. It's an important part for everybody to understand. We're not the ones taking on the liability the organizations are. The next change, and this is on page 2 in the paragraph above the sale of bonds. So it's that the one that starts, although KRS Chapter 103 also authorizes. So this one, it's been our policy generally to do loan agreement formats for industrial revenue bonds. But as you know, we recently approved one for Astana, I believe it was, for that Manchester hotel property in the distillery district. And so this continues the general policy in the policies and guidelines that we'll use the loan agreement format, not the lease or installment sale agreement. If you remember right, the Astana one involved LFUC taking ownership of the property and then leasing it to the company. this, like I said, this policy would, the policies and guidelines would continue to still say that we would want to do the loan agreement format, but that could do the other ones if special and compelling circumstances exist, and I believe we found last time for that Astana property, based on, at least in part, the determination by council years and years and years ago about that area being in an area good for IRBs as a reason to do that lease back agreement. So basically still saying that the loan agreement format is the preferred route, but unless special or compelling circumstances exist, and that the determinations made by council, the ultimate determinations made by council, and also somehow if they agree, if we agree to do the lease back procedure in the future, that it's the applicant's responsibility to, prior to council approval, reach payment in lieu of taxes agreements with Fayette County Public School, Lexington Health Department, Public Library, and others. If you remember right, the last, the Astana one, we had the pilot agreement with Fayette County Public Schools, and then others later wanted to be involved. Other taxing districts wanted to be involved. So it'd be just put these. This would be put in the policies and procedures to let people, let the businesses know from the get-go that they are responsible for getting reaching out to these taxing districts and getting pilot agreements if reaching pilot agreements with them. So that way we don't necessarily run into the same issue of getting to council and then not necessarily having all the agreements, and then the issue that we sort of ran into the last time. So the next is the issuing fees section. If you'll remember, this year we, the Economic Development Investment Board approved a new IRB fees, which was ultimately passed by Urban County Council. So those new issuing fees are provided in the policies and guidelines as updated. Another reason to have these updated guidelines, it just looks bad to have wrong fees in our policies and guidelines, so we'll need those updated, and those are, this version is the updated version. As you can see, it has the footnote to the ordinance number that they can look at to see the fees in official format. The next one would be, a big one is in the application procedure and issuance process after the bond council one. It has a new 45 calendar day recommendation that initial contact be provided to the administration by 45 calendar days. I think it used to be something like 30 days. So this just gives more flexibility to the administration and ensures that a proper review of the application is done internally. Application documents, in past versions of this, it required a certain number of copies, and it was back in the day, I believe that, you know, they might not have had the same electronic means that we have today, to put it simply. So now this is just a more flexible determination that the mayor's office will tell them how many copies they need. If any, could just be electronic copy. It's up to the determination of the mayor's office and Kevin's shop. Ultimately, I think it was something like 15, one for like all the board and multiple for the administration. And that's just not a proper use of paper anymore for the ways we can reach out and provide to you all and to others in the administration. And this isn't really a substantive change, but in the approval by the Commonwealth of Kentucky section on page 5, used to have the address of the Kentucky Private Activity Bond Allocation Committee. We removed that, and some of what was removed also that I might not have mentioned in here are not necessarily the substantive things, but just things that could potentially change in the future. So that way, instead of if the information changes, then we'd have to update the policies and guidelines. So if we just remove them and reference them, then we wouldn't have to necessarily lead to policies and procedures being amended in the future. Just try to make it easier on everyone. Have a document that might not get outdated in a year. Another one is that ultimately there was quite a few annotations to this policies and procedures document. We've reduced that substantially. As the policies and procedures provide, they're supposed to be walked through. Businesses are supposed to be walked through this process through their bond counsel, so they'll know a lot of the things that were necessarily in the annotations. So in order to reduce the size of the policies and guidelines in a way that wouldn't necessarily hurt the applicants, because they'd have bond counsel who would know a lot of these things. And also, the more you cite and quote statutes, like I mentioned earlier, the more you'll have to change later, because statutes sometimes change. And some statutes change often. So we've tried to reduce that amount of annotations. And also in the annotations, we updated the ordinance. Oftentimes we include reference to the ordinances that created the IRB process and the board, and so we updated those ordinance numbers because it's been updated quite a few times since the last time the board the policies and procedures were updated. So just again to make it into a most current in its most current form. That's all of the major changes that were made in these policies and procedures from last time the committee reviewed it, I think back in like 2014.
Questions for Evan?
Thank God for lawyers. Now, I was just gonna.
That might be the first time I've ever heard that.
Yeah. Merry Christmas. I guess my question was this an update, just standard policies and procedures, good practices, or you'd mentioned the hotel? Was that sort of a motivation to look at this again?
So this is something, and Evan can jump in, but Dave Barbary, who most of you all know, has been wanting to do even probably before Evan came on board. And so we really focused in on it in the last few months because there were, as you've just heard, some updates that needed to occur. The second is, to your point about the hotel, it did present some issues and challenges that came up after it went through this process. So we thought it was better to clean those up now, and now it actually will mirror what we've done with other incentive programs, such as when we were doing TIF programs. We were always very upfront with people. We'll tell you what the government will do, but if you want relief from the other taxing entities, that's your responsibility to go negotiate those. So this does the same thing in that regard. Evan, you may want to.
And also I think you might not have seen this in the ultimate resolution ordinances that were passed by council, but in order to do this, it referenced waiving certain requirements in the policies and procedures. So if we updated it going forward to have it under special circumstances, we can do this leaseback. We don't have to necessarily worry about waiving those type of things because it would be in the policies and procedures to the ability to be able to do.
Thanks.
And the 45-day, the other thing, I didn't know if that anybody, the 45-day really doesn't, I mean, it's great to have it in there. And it's important to have it in there, in my opinion. But that probably is, we probably typically get more lead time than that. So that should not present a problem to anybody. Caroline, did I hear you?
Yeah, I don't know if this is for Evan or for you, Kevin, but you didn't mention that this was an update, but I noticed in the issuer council review fee section, and this may not be necessary based on contract requirements, but have you thought about including some similar language to what you have for bond counsel, that selection of issuer counsel is completely at the discretion of LFUCG? Because the applicants pay for it, and sometimes you get pushback as to who they're paying for. They want to have a hand in choosing who the issuer's bond counsel is. Now, maybe it's not outside counsel, maybe it's, am I making sense?
You are, and Evan, I'm looking at you, Ashley, maybe even you. We have a bond counsel. The city is contracted with a bond counsel.
Right,
At this
okay.
point, it is Dinsmore. Evan, I defer to you or Ashley on your thoughts about defining that more.
Could you repeat your question?
Sure. In the bond counsel section, right above application, the last sentence there says, "Selection of bond counsel is at the discretion and expense of the applicant." There's not a corresponding statement to that effect for issuer counsel, and I'm just wondering if there's any value in that. Maybe not.
Yeah, that's definitely something I can bring back and discuss. I don't know if it's in the past there's been any pushback on anything like that.
We would get pushback at the state level.
Oh,
but-
okay. But yeah, no, like Kevin mentioned, we have our own, and it seems like they haven't had too much problems.
And I'm looking at Ashley, what if we just defined it as the city's bond counsel?
Sure.
Because we use the same bond counsel for all our bond packages. I'm looking at Dale and Ashley, if I'm correct, right?
That's correct, and I think that would be a good inclusion. If you say discretion for the city, you're gonna create problems for yourself because that's your RFP. So it actually would, I think, create more pushback for the city to say that it has discretion when it really doesn't, because the best argument that the city has in using its bond counsel, its assigned bond counsel, is that it has no discretion.
Okay.
Because it already has a contract that has been RFP'd.
Gotcha. Okay.
Evan, are you okay with that?
Yeah, that sounds fine. Like I said, in the last few they haven't had too much. I haven't heard of any pushback, but definitely with your work for the state, you probably definitely have more experience on that than me. But definitely, if we start seeing those problems, I think that's definitely something to reach to
So
consider.
Are we saying we're going to
But
put that language in there, that it would be?
was that I wasn't sure if that was because and. Yeah, and I'd agree with the making it more less wishy-washy, so to speak.
Or even just to find issuer counsel as the city's bond counsel, or,
Can we make that change?
Yeah, we can make it. And also, I think one of the changes was it references in a past version in that bond counsel section, there was also another, in past version, there was a selection of bond counsel shall be at the discretion and expense of the applicant, so that didn't change necessarily from the last time this was considered. But used to reference I can't remember what book it's called, but there's a book of approved bond counsels, and we removed that because I think that's, I think it's probably a given.
Additional questions? I'm not seeing any. If you all are okay with these changes, with the one item that we just discussed, we just need a motion and a second. Liz? Caroline? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Evan.
All right, and this will just then go to council after this, so I appreciate
We'll
your
take it to the council after the break. And when we're talking about the bond council, I mean, the good thing, that adds some consistency, because we're having them review it on the front end as well. So, I mean, it just makes a lot of sense. Any comments from the board? Brad, I see you.
Yeah, just as a recommendation, administrative, I'd love to see markup copies of these versus kind of walking through it. My attorneys have taught me over the years that markup's best, so I'm a better learner. So that's just an administrative recommendation.
And I might just say thank you to the staff for all the work that you all did on the different jobs funds partners and also on this.
All the credit goes to Ashley on that one. Seeing no others, we are adjourned.
Okay, thank you.